what we're going to do today is we're going to be talking a little bit about um, strategy. And the start of this webinar, the seed for this webinar was actually the last webinar we did with Rebecca 3 months ago, Rebecca.
Yep.
Um, and in there, we talked a bit about strategy, and we asked the question, hey, does anybody want a session where we talk a bit more about strategy and what it is and why it fails and all that kind of big stuff? And that's what we're here to do. Okay, so we're going to dig into this when strategy fails, how the PMO can help get things moving again. So who is this crazy woman, Rebecca Reynolds? Gosh, Rebecca, I don't know. Did we first meet 6 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that?
Yep.
And Rebecca's a consultant who works typically with the executives of government agencies and nonprofits in the US predominantly. She's super smart, super cultured. Took some time out to go and do some research into 16th century, 17th century opera singer in Italy or something. What was it, Rebecca?
18th, but close enough.
18.
18th. Yeah, it's fine.
18. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So some real horsepower. So Rebecca, just tell us a little bit about who you are, because I think it's really relevant to the topic that we're talking about, that people understand who you are and what you do.
Yeah, well, I started out in nonprofit executive management, and I did two jobs, both of which very much were about transforming the organization, particularly from the leadership vantage point. I just found that a lot of the mindset that was happening was antithetical to what they were trying to accomplish. And I was pretty young, but there were just things that made common sense to me. And those two jobs really got me to realizing that I was good at change. I really liked to get in there and work with leaders and get them to, shift their thinking so they could be, the whole organization could be more productive. So I hung out my shingle when I was 29, I think. And I basically started my career with little nonprofits, working with boards and that whole notion of collaborative leadership and how to really, the biggest problem with nonprofits for them mostly is anonymity. They're small and nobody really knows who they are. So really working on who are we, what is our value, how do we state that value in a way that's compelling. Those were the very early issues I was dealing with. And that, of course, that translated into raising money, right? Because if you don't have a compelling story, nobody's giving you any money. And nonprofits, of course, depend on that. But early on, one of my clients, his day job was for the federal government, US Forest Service. And he said, I don't know what exactly it is you do, but I think I need you in my day job. So that started a shift into federal government work and also federally government-led large projects that were multi-entities, so corporate, academia, NGOs, et cetera. And those were really cool projects. But a lot of them were based on the same principles we're going to talk about today, which is how do you get big vision and strategy to align with execution such that it's not, just a stumbling block, a barrier, a problem. It's actually just smooth sailing.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for that. So the thing to take away from that is that, Rebecca's been there and done it, right? And done it multiple times in these large organizations. I see that we've got a few people from various government departments on the session today as well. So again, Rebecca's experience, I think, will be really directly relevant to some of you. So let's kick off with a question for the audience, please. Answers in the chat. I did warn you, go find the chat button if you haven't already. So who on the call is in project delivery? Who thinks of themselves as being in project delivery? Give you a second to find the chat. I like that one, Becca. Come on, more than occasionally. Yeah. Oh, I like Harry's. And it's interesting coming from Harry, because Harry spends a lot of time again at that senior level, that strategic level. So this is, of course, a trick question, right? Because we're not in project delivery. That's not what we're here for. We're in strategy execution, right? So why do we do projects? Well, we do projects to execute strategy. All strategy means, right? So simplifying it down to its absolute bare basics is we're here today. We want to be over there, and we want to plan to get there, right? So we are in strategy execution. We are because projects are what get you from where we are today to where we want to be. And so when we're doing projects, we're not just doing projects, we're actually executing the strategy. And it's this sort of gap in mentality. It's this gap in the way that people think that often causes problems in organizations. And is the Laura Barnard, for example, talks about the strategy execution gap. Other people just call it the strategy gap or the strategy cycle gap. There's lots of different names for it, but it's a pretty well documented phenomenon that the executives, they have their strategy. The execution teams are just told to go and do stuff, and then everything falls apart. So we're going to try and understand why today, and we're going to try and plug the gap. And here we go. So those in the UK obviously will get the reference, Mind the Gap. Oh dear. Those of you outside the UK, if you've never been to the UK, we have the subway, the underground, that runs around underneath London. And as the trains come in, there's a little gap just kind of here, runs along the train. And so you get this announcement, mind the gap, mind the gap. And it's a very London thing to hear that, mind the gap. So we're going to mind the gap today. And the gap is really about, doing more with less, right? That's what people say. And I'm not sure that that's really what we mean. I think usually, and Harry, who just commented here, by the way, Harry wrote an excellent book on prioritization and prioritizing everything, not just projects. I suspect Harry would agree with this. Let's see if he does in the chat. Doing more with less isn't usually about actually doing more. It's usually about doing less, but doing the right things, right? So prioritizing the right things, the things that'll add value. And when you do that, you actually get more value, right, with less resource or less money or whatever the constraint is. So that's what we're going to try and do today. Now, we've structured this. We've got a few questions. We've sort of got 3 sections to this, hopefully. Let me move the chat again. So we've got sort of 3 sections. The first bit is about getting your ducks in a row. So this is about you in the PMO getting your own story together, right? And we're going to break it into strategic planning, priorities and decision making, communication and transparency. But this is about you getting yourselves organized before you go to the leadership team. And then we've got some questions for the leadership team, right? So we've got questions, and we're going to tackle a few of those questions, but we're not going to do them all, right? There's some homework for you guys to go and ask these questions, right? So this is what we're going to do. If you're interested in getting a copy of the slides, and they don't look pretty, they're not here to be fancy marketing slides. It's really just giving you some information, some ideas. But if you would like a copy of the slides along with the questions, these questions here, then just drop a note into the chat. The chat is the way. Drop a note into the chat, and Priti will see that, and she will send you a copy of the questions along with it. So just drop.
Before we dive into this, I just wanted to kind of get back to that meta level a minute.
Yeah.
And just say that, a gap is created. I mean, just like the slide with the tube, that 2 things, right? 2 things are not completely joined, right? There's some sort of space between those 2. The bigger the space, right, the more difficult it's going to be to get across. So what is the problem? We have space, and that space can be created by both things or one or the other, right? So I always look at, where are we? And everybody's always pointing to the other side of the gap as the problem, right? If leadership would just blah, 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 and leaders are like, if my people would just blah, 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 right? So we've got 2 sides of the gap, and they both are looking across, pointing. I always say, let's start with ourselves, because if we can move our side of the gap over, the gap's smaller. And what do we have charge of? Obviously ourselves. So that's how Stuart and I came up with these questions. One is, for that, we're taking it from the PMO's perspective, but the first questions that the PMO should be asking and answering are the ones for themselves. So that's where we're starting. And then we can also talk about, once you've got that, then you can start to ask the leadership on their side questions that are going to help close their side of the gap. So that was kind of the thinking, right? I mean, that makes
Absolutely.
sense, right, Stuart? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to be honest, I was at a conference here in Vilnius today, called the Bridge Conference. It's kind of a project management PMO conference. And I chaired a panel that was on this exact same topic, right? So everybody's talking about it. When I go to conferences around the world, this is, how do I close the gap? How do I get executives to pay attention? How do I get them to value what the PMO does? Right? They're all the same question. And it's the most common question that I get asked. Although I have to say that what's going to happen to AI is catching up really, really quickly. But still, how do I close this gap is still is the biggest question that I get asked at
And
conferences.
I think too that one of the reasons it's a tricky question is because it's never just one thing, and it's never the same thing, right?
Yeah.
That's one reason when I go in to an organization, what I'm looking for is, what is their particular gap creator? What are they? Is it how they're talking to each other? Is it that one doesn't understand the value of the other? Is the strategy not clear on the leadership side? So no matter what over here is doing, right, it's not never going to get to the strategy because the strategy is not articulated. So we're looking for, where are the big issues between that are creating that gap? That's the real art to the whole thing.
Now, before we jump into the questions, there's one thing I want to say. So Rebecca tackles this usually from the executive's side of the gap, right? She lives in the executives in the boardroom, right? Helping them think about, what's my strategy and how do I bridge the gap? So this is your opportunity as the bulk of the people on here are in PMOs, serve PMOs, project managers, and so forth, right? So this is your opportunity to quiz someone who lives on the other side of the gap. So if you don't ask questions, if you don't get the most out of this call, don't blame Rebecca, blame yourself. Chat is open, and if you ask questions, I will do my best to integrate them into the conversation. Does that sound like a deal, folks? Sound good? Just smash the thumbs up or something. Let me know that feels like a good plan. And we will move on. Excellent. Right, let's go. So we're starting off, right, with this piece, the strategic planning piece. And again, this is within the PMO. Okay, so this isn't corporate strategic planning. This is within the PMO. And there's a bunch of questions here. And what we've tried to do with each section is just pick one question, right? So in this case, it's this one, okay? So, and the idea is these are the questions that you ask yourselves, you ask your team, right? You discuss this and you try and figure this out. And so the first question is, are there any assumptions in our current strategy that we should revisit based on recent developments? So Rebecca, why would we ask this question in the first place?
Yeah, this is, I think, a really, really critical one, because this is what gets us into a more strategic and more leadership mindset ourselves. And the hardest part about being in execution is that we get our heads down in execution and we just think there, right? So this question is really designed, and maybe you've got better language for it. I mean, everybody use your own, language that makes sense to you. But the idea is to bring you up fairly regularly, right? To keep your head up looking out. It's like when you drive a car, if you only look in the very front of the car, you're going to end up hitting something, right? So you got to keep your head up and you got to look out, down, and across, and next to you. And I think the more we can, we don't need to do this all the time. We need to institutionalize it as part of our process so that we're looking for, what is leadership probably seeing? What are they looking for? And that gets us to a leadership level that we can have, where we can have a more interesting conversation, right? And better understand what leaders are bringing to us, because that's their job, is to keep their eyes out, right? So this keeps us current with ourselves, and it gives us a really nice bridge to talking to execs.
Yeah. Rebecca, are you seeing the chat? Because
I'm trying to see them. They're very
okay, so
small for me.
Fadi just made a really cool comment, right? He said,
Uh-huh.
right, this question is one of the mechanisms for real-time strategic management. Absolutely. And the PMO actually is not a project delivery function. It's a business function. It's a strategic facilitation function. So the questions you should be asking should sound like strategy related questions, right? They should sound like strategic management questions. And so, one of the things that I really hope everybody's going to walk away with, if you haven't already, some of you I know have already made this transition, but what I'm really hoping you'll all walk away with from today is this really firm conviction that you no longer work in project delivery, you work in strategy execution, and start to help your teams make that transition, right? Project management and PMO, their business functions, their leadership roles to help the organization execute the strategy. You do that through projects, of course, yes. But they're really leadership business roles.
And
There to,
that aligns you with leadership. So
yeah,
you're all, they're going to recognize that language because that's the language they're talking, or they're supposed to be talking. I just want to put a small caveat in here. One of the reasons we have questions for leadership is because it is true that not all leaders know how to articulate and even create robust, clear, awesome strategy. That's why I have a job, right? It's because they need help too. So you may have a gap there, but right, it's easier to daylight that gap if you're asking those questions on your side, right? And then you can
yeah,
engage leadership.
yeah. So Catherine made an interesting
Mm.
comment, which is unfortunately we don't have a seat at the table. Execs, and this is absolutely classic, Catherine, that the execs sit in a room, they do the strategy thing, and they come up with a plan and they pat themselves on the back and then they throw it over the wall and then wonder why it doesn't work. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on. But you're spot on. Now, there's one thing that we do that I'd recommend. It'll be in the information pack, hopefully. And I think Lenora's on, so she may even drop the link in. Is we do a thing called the Case for Change, which is actually it's just a little workshop that we do with the PMO. It doesn't cost anything. It's a little workshop we do with the PMO to help them build a case for why they should have a seat at the table, why the organization should change the role of the PMO and make it more included in this strategy process, because it is a strategy execution capability function.
I think
Sorry, go ahead, Rebecca.
I was just going to say there's another way in, Catherine, that I've used with my clients who had that issue, which is and maybe you've already got something like this, but the PMO is usually responsible for the process, developing the process by which leadership makes those priorities, right?
Yeah.
So if you're bringing in something like transparent choice, right? The PMO is presumably responsible for building out how transparent choice is used by leadership to create strategy, to prioritize. That power is so huge, it just guarantees you a seat at the table. That's what we started doing. We just started bringing in these tools. Leadership didn't have time to bother with creating the underpinnings of the tool, right? They just wanted to use it. We had to sell them on why the tool was brilliant, which was easy to do because transparent choice is brilliant. And so that got the PMO in the room in a very active, much more powerful way than if they'd just been sitting there chitty chatting, right? Because you're creating the whole foundation of what the tool is spitting out. So that's just an idea.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And the comments are brilliant, folks. Keep them coming. We're probably going to touch on some of the themes that you're talking about as we go through here. So let's just kind of keep going a little bit.
I love the mention of governance. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely
and
huge.
I suspect we'll touch on that a little bit later on. And the interesting thing is, again, remember, we're still at the when we're talking about the strategy here, we're still talking inside the PMO, right? We're not really talking about the corporate strategy necessarily. We're talking about internally within the PMO. Yes, we're going to be recording it, and if you look for an email from Pretty@TransparentChoice, you'll get the recording and everything else. So Rebecca, what are some of the things that you might expect to see that are assumptions that you might want to revisit?
Well, I mean, I think, very basically, okay. I would also say that this question also helps us look at if we've built out a consistent, well-crafted process ourselves and what that's based on. And, or is our own process a bit on the haphazard sort of, floaty around, sort of situation. If we built out a really good one, then our assumptions are obvious, right? They're basically the criteria that we're using, the value we place on those things. As we know, if anybody's using transparent choice, one of the beautiful things is that you can weight your criteria. Those weights are often what change. Our criteria is generally, if it's well set and it's strategic, those are usually more durable, but the comparative weights may shift.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're starting to talk about, priorities and decision making already. And there are some great questions in here, right? So if you've asked for the slides, if you haven't asked for the slides and you do want them, just drop a quick comment into the chat to let us know. But some of these questions here are really a fabulous way to see if you are already thinking strategically. So again, I was in a room full of PMOs today, and we were talking about these very topics. So this top question, what are the top 3 priorities of leadership right now? An awful lot of PMOs can't answer that question. They don't know the answer to that question, which is a problem. But we're going to focus actually on the green one, on the next one. Whoops, here we go. So you can use these questions to really guide an internal conversation, right? There we go. Finally, it works. So I'll read this out in case people are struggling with the green text. So how often and in what form are we providing progress updates to leadership? Is this effective? How do you know it's effective, right? So how we know it's effective is that we're getting funded, we get asked relevant questions, our strategy and decision making is trusted. So into the chat, please. Who feels like, right, in their PMO,
I think you may have skipped
have I
over,
skipped
and
one?
that's okay. I mean, this one, we can do this one, but I think we might have skipped into it, the next one, I think.
Oh, I seem to be having
See, that one is different. That's the one about, are we saying no? But it's no big deal. Whatever you want to do, Stuart.
Oh yeah, you're
They're
right.
all
I
good questions.
don't know what happened there. Okay.
Yeah, it's
So
no big deal.
let's just stay here then. So so how are we incorporating the need to prioritize what we do into our decision-making process, right? Is it working? And are we saying no? So question for the audience, yes or no? Do you feel like you're in a good position where you've got structured decisions that are able to say no? And it's not you saying no, it's the business saying no. I like these answers. Not yet. That's a good answer.
So
Correct.
I'd be curious, what when you say not yet, what are you missing? Can you just put that quickly in there? I'm just curious to see what's keeping you from being there yet. Have the process been not applied properly? Okay, cool.
Nice.
Awesome.
Nice. Priorities change too often. Ooh, good one, Ashok. That's interesting.
Maybe we're not looking strategically enough if they're changing that often. And is that coming from leadership, Ashok, or is that you guys internally? I'm just curious if it was, because leadership can also be guilty of that, right? It's changing priorities every couple of months and it just makes everybody just exhausted,
Mm-hmm.
it's not doing their job. They're just thinking too small. That's why they're changing all the time. Anyway,
Yeah.
have a process that's applied where I work PMO are not effectively used. Well,
Mhm.
that's again a leadership problem, right? Definitely.
So,
Oh, dear.
this is really interesting, right? There's a couple of these answers where they're saying, yeah, we've kind of got a process, but it keeps changing, or we've sort of got a process, but we don't quite stick to it, or we override it, or we
Yep. Yep.
and you've had some of that in the past before, Rebecca, and we sort of tried, you know, we kind of helped fix some of that. So, you know, where have you seen that kind of thing before, and what do you think are the root causes?
Well, I think number one, it's first of all, people have a hard time saying no. And so they will create all kinds of confusion and shifting things, shifting sands, so they can avoid it. And that's one thing we've got to just talk about right out. You know, that if we've got a list of projects, our job is to say yes to some, you know, see coming on others and no to others. And maybe it's not no, but it's not yet, right? So that's a mindset issue. And it's also, I think the reason people don't like to say no is because they don't feel that they have the basis to say it. So that's the second issue. Are we absolutely crystal clear about the values, the criteria that we're using, and are those transparent to the people that are presenting projects? If they're not, then people are just throwing projects in that they're creating out of thin air, right? And they don't understand the basis of the no. So when they get the no or they get the not yet, they get all crabby and they're like, well, that's not fair. And da, da, da. And they're right. It isn't fair. So we're needing to better daylight those criteria. And we can even, the beautiful thing about transparent choice, and I know I sound like an ad for Stuart's product, but what I did with it is because I was working with federal government, I brought in like 400 people into the process of creating their criteria so that we'd have buy-in. And once we
Mm.
got the results, people were like, oh, right. So it didn't feel like a black box.
Yeah.
And so those are the two things I see most often.
And it's actually a really important thing, right? Is that part of the reason that this happens is because imagine you got a 5-year-old, okay, and thank goodness I'm past that stage. I have twin boys, but they're 17. I don't have to do this anymore. So with a 5-year-old, right, you go in and you say, "Here's a chocolate cake. Would you like a chocolate cake?" And they go, "Yeah." And then you say, "Oh, and by the way, here's some donuts. Do you want some donuts?" "Oh, yeah." And then you say, "Oh, here's some candy. Would you like some candy?" "Oh, yeah." Right? Because they want everything, right? And the problem is that you're giving them these wonderful things that they would like to have. And executives are just the same. When you focus them on, here are the nice, tasty foods that you can have, they want them all. And what Rebecca's talking about when she's saying criteria is that there's a step before you even look at the projects, which is understanding, what are our goals? What are we trying to achieve? What are our values? What are our different organizations use different words for this, right? But it's basically, what are we trying to achieve? And so and people confuse the word priorities because they talk about projects as priorities. Projects are not priorities. Projects are things you do. Your priorities are, what are we trying to achieve and which of those is more important? That's what your priorities are. And so when Rebecca's talking about the criteria, that's really what she's talking about, is figuring out as a team what those goals are. And so, Rebecca, when you did that with the US government, that branch of government, what were the kind of conversations and what was the reaction that people had to those conversations?
Well, very often, it was completely like a mystical experience almost for leaders to really be asking themselves in a deep way, what are we trying to accomplish? Literally. And I would have to say to them, all right, they could talk about their problems all day long, right? Humans tend to sort for the negative. So I would just say, okay, if that's the problem, and I'd be listening to all their problems and I'd start to bin them up. These sound like the big problems that you've got. Oh, yes, that's it. You got it. Okay. And then I'd say, all right, let's turn it into what the desired future is. The opposite of the problem is the destination, right? And we need language for that because people are motivated, surprisingly enough, by that, right? Ending hunger is a huge thing that motivates a lot of people. Are we ever going to end world hunger? No, we're not. But a lot of people work on it, right? So having leadership be able to articulate both the problem side and the desired future, those futures begin to create the basis for the criteria through which the projects are evaluated. And if those destinations, if those goals, as Stuart called, or outcomes, or whatever words work for you in your environment, if those are the basis of project evaluation and prioritization, now we're golden. And if
Yeah.
everybody understands that, they're not going to submit projects that don't fit. And if they do and they get a no, that is the rigor that we need in our process to actually say no to the things that don't fit. And that's leadership's got to be behind that, because no PMO can do that on their own. And that's what I work with.
You're
leadership.
100% right. And there are two really interesting things there, right? Is that interestingly enough, those goals don't tend to change very quickly, right? Those business priorities don't tend to change very quickly. If you're in government,
if they're positioned at the right strategic level. So yes.
That's right. But if you're in government and there's a change of regime or something, then they can shift quite quickly. But generally speaking, those goals don't move around very much. And so all of that volatility that you're seeing with priorities changing, what you really mean is that which projects seem important keep changing, but that's not because the importance of the projects changes. It's because you haven't measured the importance of the project against properly thought through goals. It's that simple. So if you can get agreement, have a proper structured conversation about those goals, you can then use that to evaluate your actions, your potential actions to implement those goals, right? So you're going from strategy to execution, right? Which is why we're talking about being in strategy execution, not in project delivery, right? So it's really quite a simple concept, and Rebecca's used, you just mentioned it a couple of times, used our software to do this, and what the kind of conversations that we have with executives after they've been through the process is, wow, we've had a very different kind of conversation, right? We are aligned for the first time ever. That kind of statement. Did you get any of that when you were going through that process?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, I am.
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, one of the things I wanted to say about this whole morass is language is so incredibly slippery, right? We use all this language and we think we understand what we mean. And half the time, what I'm saying when I'm in these conversations is, can you help me better understand what you mean? And why I'm asking that is because I can tell that the way somebody's using strategy or goal or outcome or this or whatever word it is not the same as what this other person is. And so they're talking like this, right? And that is part of the gap creation, right? Because we're unknowingly talking across or past each other, and we're not getting really clear criteria that we all feel, understand, and own, right? So that process takes time, right? And that's why the conversation finally feels better, like you're saying, Stuart, because they can feel in their body that they've actually finally agreed. We all know when somebody's agreeing and it feels like they're agreeing, and when they're just talking, right, across and using the similar language.
And actually, the point where the magic happens is the meeting where you're weighting criteria, right? Because that's the discussion where you're saying, okay, we've said these 10 things are important. Let's figure out which ones are really important, right? And so we use in the product, we use a piece of decision science called AHP, Analytic Hierarchy Process. And we use that because it works. Okay, so just sitting people down and saying, hey, what weight should we put on this criteria? I'm not going to give you the whole spiel. This isn't meant to be an advert for the product. But if you just sort of sit there and say, hey, what weight should we put on the criteria? It triggers all kinds of biases. It triggers all kinds of power politics. It triggers cascade. There are sort of decision cascades that start. As soon as you've got a group of people sitting in a room who appears, there's politics, there's power at play, and So what AHP does is it breaks all of that down and it kind of neutralizes it. It gives everybody a voice, so everybody feels heard. And if people feel heard, usually they can buy into the answer. They might not always agree with the outcome, but if they understand why it's like that and they feel like their voice was heard, then they'll usually back it and buy it, right? So it's incredibly important. And the reason that it's important, and this is the second big benefit of doing this, is that then you get out of the business of saying no. You don't need to say no.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's why the tool is so powerful, because it puts the daylighting of the mismatch of that project with these criteria right over there on the board, and we can all look at it together and go, look what we came up with. It's not the PMO saying no, and that is great. You want to get out of that. You never want to be the no sayer. That's that just makes you unpopular, which I'm sure you've all
Yeah.
experienced.
You don't want to be that PMO, right? You don't want to be the process police. You don't want to be the
Oh,
guy.
that's exactly right. The process, please. Ugh.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we
No,
should
no, no,
maybe.
Rebecca, it's the process, please. Can we at
Oh,
least speak
sorry,
English on this
sorry, I'm
call?
sorry. I'm in Canada. I should be knowing that. The process, please. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So let's move on to the next question, because we're not really rattling through them very quickly, but we are having a good conversation, I hope. So here we go. Progress updates. This is the question we were looking at earlier on. This is the next zone. So there was a number of questions, and we just picked one of them. So anyone that's put their name in will get a copy of the whole list of the questions. So this is about providing updates. How often and in what form? And are they working? Is it effective? And so you're going to know that it's effective when you're getting funded, right? When activity is getting funded, when the PMO is getting funded because you're adding value, when executives are asking relevant questions, and the decision-making process is trusted, right? You're seen as a partner in that process. So very quickly in the chat, I'm not going to ask anybody to say, well, yes, I will. So just give me a quick yes, no. Does that sound like you? Does it sound like you're in that position where it's really effective?
Well, and I just want to say too, this is one of the big stumbling blocks on the PMO side, is that the what we're providing to leadership in terms of updates or information and how often is not working. And so this is our key way, this is our key moment to communicate. And if we're not taking advantage of it, right, we're just in the soup.
Yeah, yeah. I love Deb's answer. The SLT has ADD. Yeah, that is a challenge actually, and
That
part
is
of that.
exactly right. How to grab them. You are spot
Yes.
on. And there, I believe there's always a way. You just
Yeah.
have to understand who you're talking to, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so here we go. So Catherine said something really interesting there, which is that they've said our reporting isn't working, but they don't know what they want. And so very often what we see, Rebecca, I don't know if this aligns with you, but very often what we see the PMO presenting is lots of data,
Yep.
not much insight.
Yep.
And what as a general rule, I think what executives want is they want the insight, and they want to know the insight is backed up by data.
Yep.
So is that your experience as well?
Yep. What the data means. I think we get very caught up in our own worlds, our own language, our own acronyms, our own cool data, how we got to this data. It's so interesting to us. Nobody cares up there. They don't care about that. Talk about that internally and congratulate yourselves. When you get upstairs, he's absolutely right. What they care about is, what the hell does this mean to us? So you've
Yeah.
got to turn your brain and focus it on them. And if you don't know how to do that, that's going to be your problem, because you're never going to be able to talk to leadership, right? So that's one of the things that, again, I help with is people, when they're talking to you, they'll tell you everything you need to know without actually telling you. I mean, if you ask Catherine, what do you want from us? Okay. They'll say, well, yeah, we don't know. Okay. Or here's what we want, but that's not what they really want, because you bring it to them and they say no. What we've got to do is we've got to listen under, not ask them directly, listen to what they're at, what they're talking about, what their complaints are. And we then have to surmise, right, what it is. And we try different approaches. But I do believe Stuart's nailing it. If we're talking about us, our data, how we got it, how cool that was, and wanting to get pat on the back for that, it's not going to happen. If we bring insight and meaning that leaders can understand and that makes them go, aha. Oh, I wanted to say that's one of the greatest gifts we can give to leaders, is to give them an aha moment. They're not always looking for product and results, even though they say they are. They'll a lot of times want that aha, because they've got to lead, right? And getting a new idea that changes their thinking forever. Now you're valuable and you're a strategic advisor to them.
Yeah, 100%. So Deb says, we need to present updates in business terms. Any thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, say it again.
So Deb says we need to present updates in business terms.
Yes. So what do you mean by business terms? I'm assuming you mean leadership, the executive leader and the organization. Is that what you mean, Deb?
Yeah, so many of the PMs
Yes.
present IT updates. Correct. Bang.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, I had that problem with a client, and the CIO was never invited into the leadership conversations. The CIO, because all the CIO could do was talk in tech terms. And leadership was just like, we don't care, we don't understand it, this is boring, get out of here. And so we had to train the CIO and the team how to talk in lay language, in the leadership language, so that they could really understand what was going on. So business, if you say business, I just think that's speak for whatever the leadership, how they talk, what they're thinking about, in or if you want to, if you're trying to reach them. I mean, we always have to translate, no matter who we're talking to, right? Stuart and I talked about how to talk to you all, right? He said to me, we're not talking to the C-suite here, we're talking to PMOs. So Rebecca, you need to think about that, right? So we're always having to translate how we talk to people. It's no different when we're talking up, right?
So imagine that most of us have taken flights in our life, and many of us have hit air turbulence or had bumpy ride on the flight. So the plane's shaking and everybody's a little bit nervous, right? And the pilot comes on and he starts telling you, right? He says, well, we're suffering from a little bit of wind shear, which is causing vortices off the trailing edge of the, right? Does that help you one little bit? No, right? What you want to hear from the pilot is, don't worry, folks. This is all normal. It's going to last about 5 minutes and then we'll be fine. That's what you want to hear, right? So it's the same thing in projects. If you go in there and you start talking projectese at them, if you can't start telling them about the technical stuff, glaze over, they don't understand it, and then they switch off. And when you do say, oh, and by the way, everything's gonna be fine in 5 minutes, they won't hear it because they've switched off. So this one's
Deb, I love that. Finish sprint 2. You can tell, right? We're trying to get our bosses to acknowledge our accomplishments. And that is not what executive leadership is for. They'll acknowledge your accomplishment when you prove strategic value to them.
right.
You'll get all kinds of things. And that's what I meant when I said, how often and what form are we providing progress? Is it effective? How do we know it's effective? We get the money we ask for. They ask us interesting and relevant questions. That means they're connected to us. And third, they trust our strategic advice and our decision-making process. Those 3 things are
Yeah.
gold,
And
right?
and and,
Without
and
them, we
Deb
can't do anything.
and Deb, I'm going to see your feature ABC was completed, and I'm going to raise it, right? I'm going to raise you to a benefit, right? So I'm going to say, our goal of this project is to increase our revenue by $10 million. We've delivered this feature, which will enable $2 million of that, and the other 8 million will come in 3 months, but I need you to make this decision to enable that. That is what they want to hear, right? Does that make sense? Let's have some thumbs up if this is making sense to people. I'm hoping it is. It's making sense to me. Yeah, we've got lots of thumbs. That's awesome. Excellent. Right, let's keep going because we've only got 10 minutes left. I can't believe it's gone so fast. This is one of the fastest webinars we've ever done, or feels it anyway. So let's go. Let's go. Now we've got the next section is about leaders. Let me hide this so you all can see this. So up to now we've been talking internally within the PMO. We're now going to start asking questions of the leadership, right? So we're changing gear a little bit here. And I'm not sure we're going to get through all three of these. In fact, I'm pretty sure we're not going to get through all three of these. Do you have a preference, Rebecca, which one we do?
I thought we said,
I think we said that one, didn't we? Biggest risk.
yeah, I mean, I think that's
Development.
that's a really obvious and clear one, right?
Yeah, yeah. So,
They, that's one of the things I notice is that leadership has got their idea of what success looks like, right? And that is not, it's actually not realistic. I mean, I'll give a very simple example from one of my clients. When I first started out, I was working with this little teeny homeless shelter, and they were lucky if they could get somebody to come off, that who had come off the street and take a shower pass. That's how low bar. You know, if somebody is not bathing, they really are not valuing themselves, and they're becoming more and more disconnected from society. If they will take a shower pass and take a shower, that's a sign that they're, you know, coming into the world and caring for themselves. The funder was asking them, how many people are you getting self-sufficient each year? Self-sufficient meaning they're off the street and living in an apartment with a job. And I'm like, do you see the disconnect between what they're asking, what they think success is, and where you are? I said, you have to educate them. Now, I know this is a very extreme example, and none of you have this kind of disconnect. I'm just illustrating that this homeless shelter, I said to them, I think you need to bring the funder here. They need to see what you're dealing with. And then you need to explain to them what success is. And your measure is the number of shower passes that you're giving out and that are being used, not how many people are living in apartments and getting jobs because of you. That's way up the food chain from you. And so just if they've got unrealistic KPIs, you're never going to be able to reach them, right? So that's a lot of that's education.
yeah. And this is the kind of stuff Rebecca, she's very shy. No, she's not very shy, but she's very shy, so she won't say this herself, but she's incredibly good at getting executive teams to think about this stuff. Right. Now, as a PMO, that's a difficult conversation to have.
Yeah.
Right. So, but as someone from outside the organization, it's much easier to come in and wave the big stick around and bash them on the head when they need it.
But I want to say this because I do feel like when I said to them, to this client, you need to bring the funder here, it had never occurred to them. So
Mm.
I was actually meaning a site visit, which they did. But think of that as a metaphor. A PMO can create a site visit, quote unquote, with your language, with the stories you're telling to leadership in your updates, right? And that you can begin to make that expectation on that KPI closer to what you're actually accomplishing. And if you can't do that, you probably don't know your own pace well enough. Do you follow me? I'm not saying it's your total responsibility. Leadership has a responsibility to not set unrealistic expectations, but on our side, we can still do something.
Super. So just, Selwyn, we're going to come to your question again in a minute because I think that's a really cool question. So one of the things that comes out of that example that Rebecca gave is that if you remember, when you strip it down, strategy is about saying we're here, we want to be over there, and to get there, we need to take these steps. And what Rebecca was talking about there was helping the leadership team understand, bridge the gap from where the organization is and where the services are today and helping identify what are the steps that get us to our goal. So the leadership was again, we're back to the 5-year-old, only this time we're not offering them the cake. We're on a long road trip and they're sitting in the back of the car going, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Right? So we just need to help them say, I tell you what, our first goal is we're going to get to this service station, which is like an hour and a half down the road, and then you can have a burger, right? And then we'll drive for another hour and we'll get to this place and you can there's a play park there and you can run around and burn off some energy and then another hour and then we'll be there. Oh, okay, right. I understand that, right? So that's sometimes that's the role that you have to play is just help them understand what's the reality of where we are today. And you're closer to it and you have access to the subject matter experts who are living it day to day. And so being that trusted advisor, you don't get there immediately, right? So we talked about the case for change earlier on, right? The case for change, a good case for change is how you can do that. Better yet, let's have a conversation if you need help having some of these conversations with the leadership team. And, we can help you or Rebecca can help you have those conversations, right? That would be a good thing as well.
Well, and I just want to also one more quick thing about that homeless shelter example. So the fact that you're right, I mean, right, that it was an unrealistic expectation, right? However, the funder having that expectation caused my client, the homeless shelter, to have to think about how the shower pass connects to this. And if they could make that case that this is step one to reach self-sufficiency, you see, so the leadership, the funder in that case, their expectation or their view shed helped the shelter to get their story. If they could say, we're the gateway, we're the shower pass, we're step one, but that is how we start to get to this. Do you see? So the leadership's expectation, even if it's unrealistic, helps you to fine tune your story about how to get there. So everything's valuable, I guess is what I'm saying.
Excellent. So Selwyn asks a question. We've got 3 minutes to do this. That's a big ask. But the question is, in the public sector, where efficiency is poor and there's lots of overspend, right? How can we, and any tips? And I think my first one would be make sure that you really understand what the goals are and have agreement on that. Because if you've got lots of overspend, very often that's actually the root cause of that is that most organizations try and do too much. When you do that, your people become really inefficient. And then you end up with overspend and late projects. So if you have the clarity that we've been talking about on what the strategy is, that lets you say no to stuff, which accelerates delivery and matches your capacity. And there's a whole other webinar we could do on capacity, right, Rebecca? But
Absolutely.
um,
And making that no transparent and owned by everyone. So it's not the PMO saying it or even leadership saying it. Leadership doesn't like doing it either, to be honest, right? So if we can make the criteria transparent, then the no becomes obvious to everyone from just looking at the results, which is, great, because now we're sensitizing the entire organization to the criteria and the strategy.
yeah, yeah. So we need to wrap up. We're top of the hour. Rebecca, this was a lot of fun. I think people seem to have found this really useful. So we should try and do a little bit more of this kind of thing. And but I really just want, before you disappear, give us a quick round of applause, thumbs up, hearts for Rebecca. Really appreciate you coming and giving up your
Well,
time to do this.
the other thing I wanted to say is thank you to everybody. And I feel like, Stuart, we could design something that is much more interactive because these folks have very specific types of situations that they're asking us about. And I'd like to use those
Yeah.
so we can get into more specifics with them. So maybe we can talk about that next time, how to
And
really work with
Well,
what we've got on.
and what we will do is when we follow up, I think what we should probably do is specifically just ask people, do you want to have a session with Rebecca to go to dig into the specifics
Yeah,
of your organization?
yeah, let's do it. Let's
So,
do it. Yeah.
so if you want
Thank you
that,
so much. I
if you
love
want
this
that,
forum. I love you, Stuart, and I love this group. So thank you, all of you.
awesome. So everybody, thank you very much for joining. We've pretty much gobbled up the time. We always seem to do that. There are more webinars coming. This month's demo webinar, if you've been on one of our demo webinars before, fabulous. But this month is a little bit special because we're actually going to also do the webinar with smart sheets. So we're going to show the portfolio management piece. And then we're going to show the connection into smart sheets, which is one possible way to manage the execution. So that should be fun. So watch for the emails around that. And again, just watch for emails from Pretty because that will have all of the follow-up material from this session. So everybody, thank you very much. And I love the energy you all brought to it tonight. So really appreciate you all. And thank you, Rebecca.